Going to get started. Thanks for coming out. We're hoping for a few more folks, but just the way it goes. Before we get underway, we do have folks that are going to be on Zoom, and Ellen is not, so they're going to be participating as well. And I'd like to acknowledge, well, Roger's back there now, but our host, Roger Jocelyn, here at Holy Trinity, for hosting us tonight. And also to introduce our local representatives, Al Krupski, Town Supervisor, and Kevin Stussy, Mayor of the Village. Thank you for joining us. And before we get underway, just a few words about how we're going to proceed tonight. Our program is not about taking a position. It's about sharing information so that we can all be better informed about the Water Authority's pipeline proposal, which will be moving forward. And it's up to us, the residents of the North Fork, and our elected representatives to effectively express our concerns to the Water Authority to maximize the positive impacts and minimize the negative. And there are many, many questions about the impacts. Beth Young posted an article today in the East End Beacon, and there's copies that you can take when you leave. And she expressed very well the number of questions that people have. Questions from residents around, this is from the scoping session last Thursday night. Questions from residents abound about how much water is coming, where is it coming from, what it could mean for development on the North Fork, and what a second phase of the project will provide safe drinking water for Orient. We'll start with Bob DeLuca tonight, president of the group for the East End. He'll provide an overview of the key elements of the proposal. And then Louise Harrison, Long Island project manager and senior science advisor at Save the Sound, will follow and walk us through the SCWA process and how best to frame and deliver comments and concerns to the Water Authority by the deadline of July 11th. And that deadline got extended because there was such a strong turnout at the scoping session, or we believe, and they extended it by about 3 weeks, which is great. And then we're going to move into just kind of an informal and conversational Q&A with both you guys and the folks on the Zoom, asking questions or making comments, and we'll go from there. Go away, Bob.
Thank you all very much. Is that good? Thank you all very much for coming out. My name is Bob DeLuca, and I run an organization called Group for the East End, which is a nonprofit conservation advocacy and education organization. Our office is in Southold, and I've been at this kind of work since 1985. I want to be clear in my comments today. Two things. One is I'm usually in the business of taking a position, so I will try to discipline myself to not take a position. The second thing is I am not a representative of the Suffolk County Water Authority, even though I'm going to do my best to describe the plan as they've presented it. And in my defense, I was a litigant against the Suffolk County Water Authority for its decision not to do an environmental impact statement. Our organization litigated that matter back in 1985. So I will say I am pleased that the Water Authority in this proposal has pursued the path of a full environmental review, and to their credit, has come to the community in a variety of different ways to give people an opportunity to speak about the project. So I guess maybe the first thing is, and just quickly, I have some maps and things over here later on you may want to take a look at if some of this stuff is confusing just to talk about it ethereally. You know, you can see it on the map as to where the water is and where the salt water is and how much fresh water we have. We put those maps together some years ago, but they're still fairly relevant. So first, what is the Water Authority? You may not know, right? But the Suffolk County Water Authority is a public benefit corporation created in 1951, essentially to provide public water, safe drinkable water for people in Suffolk County. And at the time, the region had a lot of private water companies or maybe a community well field or things like that. And they weren't always well managed. To the Water Authority's credit, it's a large institutional supplier of water, and they pretty much do what they say they're going to do. They have a large network. They serve over 1.3 million people or something in Suffolk County, and they have moved over time from Western Suffolk County to to eastern Suffolk County. So here in Southold Town, they have about 11,000, somewhere between 10 and 11,000 accounts or customers in Southold Town. They're not a typical part of Suffolk County government, even though the Suffolk County Water Authority. It's not like the county health department or social services department. They're kind of their own entity, although they do have a board of directors, which the county legislature is involved in appointing. They don't set standards for water quality. They don't control local zoning and land use. And I raise that because one of the big issues here for people to think about is, and this was raised throughout the process, the inducement of growth when infrastructure comes, whether it's a road, whether it's water, whether it's electric, have implications for local land use and planning. And so that's an issue that even when you're just putting a pipe in the ground to bring water is something that folks can think about. So what is this project? So this project really has two phases to it. The first phase is the one that is, is most real, if I could say that. They have a $35 million capital project approved to run about 8.5 miles of a water transmission line from essentially Flanders, where they have excess capacity in the system there, up through the town of Riverhead to the North Road, and from the North Road over to Mattatuck, roughly. And that transmission line basically brings water from an existing supply source to the existing supply lines here in Southold. And the reason they're doing it is to offset peak demand. Peak demand is, you get up early in the morning, people take a shower, they do all these things, they use all the water pressure can drop because the pressure in the system goes down. And what's happened in Southold Town, happens in a lot of coastal areas, is we don't have a lot of places to draw water from. I think they currently have something like 60 wells that they're running, which seems like that ought to be enough, but the wells here are shallow wells because we don't have a lot of fresh water when you go down pretty deep. Now, you can go to certain places in central Suffolk and you can be 300 feet into fresh water. Most places here, you go down 50, 100 feet at best, especially when you start getting out the East Marion, Orient, you're in salt water. So they have a legitimate management problem in terms of providing fresh water over time. And their concern for their customers is not just that your shower is going lower, but that fire hydrants and things like this, which they also provide service to, would not have the capacity, to fight a fire in the event something like that happens. So they primarily are going to do that work to put that transmission pipe in by trenching along the side of the road. So you dig a trench, you drop the pipe in, you backfill the trench, and you keep going. There are, I think, 3 what are called directional drills, which go under the Peconic River, and then Sawmill Creek, and I think there may be another dip under the river, maybe Terry's Creek. And what that basically allows you to do is, instead of drilling down, you kind of drill down and sideways, and you run your pipe that way. So one of the issues to think about is, how does that process work? It's not something, it's done frequently, but how does it work? How is it protected? How is the pipe going to stay in place, on all of those kinds of things? Most of the rest of it really is done along the roadside. One thing I should just mention is that all of this requires you to understand transmission lines from distribution lines from service lines. Because when you hear a pipe is coming, there's lots of different kinds of pipe. So a transmission line takes water from one large source of water, like an existing system or well, and brings it someplace else. That's what a transmission line does. A distribution line runs off of a larger line and maybe supplies your neighborhood, your subdivision or something like that. And then the service line is the line to your house. So this particular project is described as a transmission line, which means it's not designed to branch off into another area. It's just taking water from where they have it here and putting water where they need it, where we are, to try to maintain the level of water supply in the line. They think it will be done by 2030. They have said that they will work to avoid the busiest roadway seasons and work to try to stay out of the way of traffic and things like that. The second part of the project, it's really a planning assessment. And some of you may have remembered about 15 years ago or so, where there was a bit of a conflict here when the Water Authority had gotten a federal grant to run a pipe from East Marion out to Orient Village. And they kind of decided they were going to do it whether anybody wanted them to or not. They were met with stiff opposition from lots of people who said we need to plan before we act. They did not proceed with that project, and it eventually went away. But it's largely as a result of the Southold Town Board, many people in the community just saying, you're not doing this, even though you have the money to do that project. We don't want to see that done until we know what we're doing out in Orient. And again, to the credit of the Orient Association, they've been working for a number of years on their own water plan, and I've recommended to the Water Authority that that's something that they should be well aware of, which I think they are, and include that in their work. So the second part is not a funded project to put a pipe in the ground. It's a planning assessment for if a pipe were to go in the ground, what would be the environmental implications of that pipe. That makes sense from a legal standpoint because the law under which all of this is reviewed, which Louise will talk more about, requires you to look at the overall action. So even though you don't have the money for it today, it's reasonable to assume that if the transmission line comes and the existing system is what it is and demand continues to be what it is, there may be a need out in Orient, from East Marion out to Orient, and that they have an obligation to look at the potential implications of that. So that's what that is. So that is not a pipe that's proposed, nor is it funded. So again, the stated need, there are 60 wells on the North Fork and 18 well fields, 11,000 customers. The demand has increased about 90% in the last 20 years, and it continues to go up. Our water supply in the North Fork is a very vulnerable water supply. As you can imagine, we have a shallow freshwater aquifer, right? There's not a lot of deep fresh water to go after. We have saltwater intrusion is a real problem in places where people have been drawing off of the limited fresh water, both vertically underneath us and also horizontally along the shoreline. There are contamination issues that we have to deal with, and we have a shallow supply. So sometimes you can go below the contamination and find clean water. In a lot of cases, we don't have that option. So developing well fields here is also expensive because you need to put in maybe 4 or 5 shallow wells as opposed to one deep well. Cost you the same amount of money really to put each well in, so that's a problem. And irrigation is a big problem. The Water Authority estimates that about 70% of the treated water that they send to your house is going up in somebody's sprinkler system. And that is, you could argue that if we didn't have the 70% going up through one irrigation, maybe we wouldn't have to bring water in from someplace else, but that's the state of where we are. There's obviously other demands on water. There's agricultural demand using water, for irrigation of crops. And the other thing is that we have a limited area to catch new rainfall from, right? We're like at the thin end of the wedge here. So if I go down to the South Fork and I go from Bridgehampton up to Sag Harbor, that giant chunk of glacial moraine there collects a lot of water. And they actually have deep flow water there and a couple of other places. We don't really have that. We're in a very thin, narrow band of fresh water that sits atop, salt water. And the peak times they are starting to have problems where they can't meet the demand at peak times. I know it came up at the last public meeting, and I'll just state it here. The maximum capacity of the pipe that they're connecting would not be the anticipated flow in a given day. What they're looking to do, just like a peaker plant with energy, they're looking to meet the demand at the peak time, and then they wouldn't need that water because they really wouldn't have anywhere for it to go. But it's a peak demand connection. So that's kind of the quickest overview I think I could give you. We are involved in all of this through something called the State Environmental Quality Review Act. That act provides opportunities for the public to have input, which we're happy we have. And my colleague, Louise Harrison, is going to do, people should also know, Louise and I worked together like decades ago, and we did nothing but SCWA all the time.
That's true.
So Louise is going to take you through this process known as scoping, and if you're looking for more information about us, you can always just look up Bob at thegroup.org or thegroup.org. You can find out about the group that way, and we have some stuff up here if you'd like.
Thank you, Bob. And it's a real pleasure to be here. And I just want to say that I am a recent transplant to the North Fork 14 years ago and have been thrilled at the growth of the civic organizations. And now we have a civic organization in every hamlet and the village of Greenport. Congratulations on this new civic. And it's just been amazing to see the level of engagement that's been growing. So I'm really encouraged by that and happy and proud to live in the town of Southold right now. So Bob's right. He and I have been doing SCWA forever, and doing SCWA is a strange term of art. I guess it means that we've in one way or another been engaged with the process of the state's New York State's Environmental Quality Review Act. Some people call it SEEKR, some people call it SECRA. It is the overriding law that requires that when agencies and people like the Water Authority have to engage in a new project that may possibly have an impact on the environment, that is reviewed and allows for public input. And there is a process that the agencies go through before they decide that they would need to produce an environmental impact statement or have one produced. And a lot of that has taken place behind the scenes so far. Nothing secret, it's just that's what the agencies do. They do a lot of initial review. And this agency has gotten us to a point, the Water Authority has gotten us to a point where we have an opportunity to be involved. I'm going to stop for a minute because I forgot to recognize my host organization. I work for Save the Sound, and Save the Sound is a regional organization, of course, that is focused on Long Island Sound in Connecticut, Westchester, New York City, and Long Island. I am the only Long Island representative, and as I said, I live here in Southold. I'm telling you this not just because I should represent who I'm working for today, but I want you to know that it's unlikely that Save the Sound is going to take a position on this project. However, they're very happy to send me here to talk about the SEEKR process and to talk about how citizens can be involved. I've done this before, and it's fun for me, and I think it's helpful to learn how to do this. So basically, back to the SEEKR process, the Suffolk County Water Authority determined already that this project they're proposing is likely to have at least one adverse impact on the environment. And that is the trigger that makes an agency have to produce a draft environmental impact statement or have one produced. If there were an applicant, they would demand that the applicant produce that environmental impact statement or a draft for them to look at. But in this case, there is no applicant. It's the agency itself that wants to do the work and bring the pipeline through. And so they've decided that after looking at it, that they have at least one adverse environmental impact. And as a matter of fact, they listed several. They filled out a full environmental assessment form, and you may have it, but if you don't, it's on their website. And they gave their reasons supporting a determination of significance, meaning, again, there's at least one adverse impact. They listed 13 of them. And I will read you what they listed because there may be others. And if there are other impacts, these are things you can raise in your comments to the Suffolk County Water Authority. So I'm going to go through the list. The first one is shallow depth to groundwater and work within the water table during directional drill along the banks of the Peconic River. Number 2, disturbance in or near coastal erosion hazard areas. 3, disturbance in or near freshwater or tidal wetlands. 4, potential for erosion, sedimentation, or turbidity, and potential excess soil management and disposal and prevention and control of the spread of the golden nematode. Number 5, additional demand on groundwater resources at the proposed Suffolk County Water Authority water supply source. 6, disturbance in or adjacent to 100-year and 500-year floodplains and along the banks and deep beneath a floodway, parentheses, Peconic River, end parentheses. 7, possible limited disturbances in areas containing or adjacent to rare, threatened, or endangered plants and animals, natural communities and habitats. 8, disturbance adjacent to or in critical environmental areas and possible disturbance to these areas. 9, installation of mains adjacent to state and national register listed and eligible landmarks and within state and national register listed historic districts. 10, installation of mains within state designated archaeologically sensitive areas. 11, possible temporary traffic delays or disruptions in work zones along the routes, particularly during peak season and or commuting times. 12, temporary and intermittent noise along the installation route during installation. And the last one they listed is disturbance in an area identified as including a state Superfund site, and that's the area in Orient that they're referring to. So they identified this variety of potential environmental impacts. And what their next job is to provide an outline using their attention to those impacts, provide an outline of what should go into the draft environmental impact statement. And it's that outline that is the scope. So when we talk about scoping, it means that we're helping to build the outline of what should go into the draft environmental impact statement. So if you ever had to write a report and the teacher said, do an outline first to guide how your report is going, that's what scoping is all about. And we're at the point right now in this process where the public's been invited to do just that. And it's really the sweet spot for getting involved. Yes, you could wait until the draft environmental impact statement comes out and just review it and make your comments then, because there will be another comment period at that time. But you might find at that time that the document is lacking in a whole topic area that you think should have been addressed. So don't wait. This is the time to say what the topic areas should be. This is why it's the sweet spot. Now you can tell them a number of things. You can say, I think there's an additional environmental impact that you didn't mention, and I want you to address that in the environmental impact statement. You could also disagree with one of these environmental impacts that they listed if you felt that it was inappropriate. But the three things you can do at this point in scoping is identify any additional environmental impacts that you know about, and that could also include what Bob mentioned earlier as growth inducement. It's a legitimate concern that is addressed in environmental impact statements all the time. It's called a growth inducing impact. Means what would happen, how does this promote further development if we have this new resource? Also, environmental impact statements are supposed to identify legitimate alternatives to the proposed project and go through a process of evaluating each of those alternatives so that it's supposed to help them to identify if they've chosen the best alternative or not. And with public input, that can change. They may think they have the best alternative now, but hearing about additional alternatives using what you know as citizens living here can help them. It may change their mind, or it may at least flesh out what they need to think about when they're evaluating their alternatives. Another thing an environmental impact statement is supposed to do is come up with mitigation for the impacts. And mitigation basically is making things less bad. So if there's a way, for instance, to do directional drilling that has less impact, that should be discussed. If there's a way to go past an historic structure that has less impact, those mitigation techniques need to be included in the environmental impact statement. When you read through the scope, if you think there's a mitigation that hasn't been identified or you have an idea, you can add that. Or you may just have questions. Bob did a great job explaining the outline of what they presented to us the other night. And they have that on the website as well. But you may still have some questions about what this is all about and what it's going to entail. Instead of asking the question, you can tell them, please explain, fill in the blank. And that's what you can put in your comments back to the Water Authority. Or please explain why you've chosen this alternative, or please explain why this mitigation technique is your preferred one when there's potentially another one. Any question you have, you can actually turn into a directive. Now, you can just ask them questions, but that's going to cause them another step of work, is to interpret your question and figure out how to make it into a directive for their consultant. So just go ahead and tell them what it is you want covered, that you don't think is covered already in the scope. And that's what this is all about. If you skip this step, which you can, you have no obligation to do this, of course, but if you skip this step and later when the hearings come about, which there probably will be for the draft environmental impact statement, and you don't like that draft environmental impact statement, but they faithfully followed the scope, you have less of a complaint then. You follow what I'm saying? You want to tell them now what you want the contents to be. Then if they don't do it, and a lot of people, let's say, ask for the same things to be covered, let's just pick one. Let's say it's growth-inducing impacts. Let's say everybody in this room asks for that. I don't know how many people are here, but it's probably 35 or 40 people. So if that many people are asking for it just from this session alone, and they don't cover that adequately, you're all going to come back at the hearing and complain when they have a comment period for the DEIS, the draft environmental impact statement. And they don't want you to come back and complain. They want the project to go through and be accepted and go about their business providing water. So that's why I'm going to suggest that you work at this now. Go to their website, look at the draft scope, which is what they've provided as what they want to cover based on their 13 impacts that they see. Decide if you think it's enough. Decide if you think it needs to address additional potential environmental impacts. And then tell them what you want them to do. That's basically it. I'm focusing on the scoping part of the program right now because that's where we're at. It is the sweet spot. Later on, when the draft environmental impact statement comes out, you'll have an opportunity and you'll have plenty of time to go over it and produce your comments again then. And there's probably a lot of conversation that's going to take place in the civics, in the newspapers, in town halls, in Village Hall between now and then. But this is a great spot to start your involvement. So that's basically what I want to say. I can answer other questions about the State Environmental Quality Review Act, so can Bob. But that's why I'm here tonight, is just to share with you that I hope you'll do this. You have power in doing this. You have agency in doing this. And if you pose these as directives to this lead agency, there's a very high likelihood they're going to have to cover it. And then later you can decide whether or not they've covered it properly. So that concludes my remarks unless we have questions.
So before we get into some questions, Mayor Stussy is here tonight and has offered to just say a few words about Greenport purchases their water from Suffolk County Water Authority wholesale, and then serves as the distributor of it, correct? And maybe just give us a little background on that. Kevin,
Yeah, no problem. Well, firstly, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for so wonderful to see our new city. Hardworking board. As many folks know, and some may not know, the village used to put wells on points. The village sold them off to the county. In the village from the county. What some folks who weren't here in the mid-'80s might not know is the water was water couldn't drink it. A number of the wells were obviously farming pollution in the water that got mixed. Done a number of those which did happen. Now we've got clean water here. I will tell you, in my role as mayor, I am really afraid of what the future might be. Saltwater intrusion in particular, and then also some of the legacy farming long ago and what's going in right now. I think it's really important in the distinction of in the different. While our board hasn't yet taken personally, I believe our focused zoning for dealing with participate in towns that significant work. Greater South. That looking forward to many more meetings.
Thank you, Kevin. And I also want to turn it over to Anne Murray from East Marion's Community Association and the North Fork Environmental Council.
I just want to say really quickly that myself and a woman from the town's water committee presented a memo to the town board last month asking them to have the USGS do a study of Southold's aquifer. And the reason we did that is because USGS is just finishing up a complete Long Island water sustainability study. However, because Southold's upper glacial aquifer is very different than the rest of Long Island, the study was generalized and it wasn't specific enough to Southold. If the town gets USGS to do its own separate study, they can use the terrific technology they have now to really measure where the saltwater intrusion meets the freshwater lens at different places in Southold. This has never been done. All the previous work and the studies that you see were all sort of estimates. They didn't have the technology back then to do the work. So we're really hoping that the town will invest in that because we think that's a good investment for the future.
Yeah. And with that, I'll just open it up to
Thank you. And I have to, first say that, we should really be grateful to be in a community where you have an active civic for every hamlet. And then not only that, but you have, mind the way. And you also have people like, and Bob, thank you so much, and Louise, for providing the community with so much information and experience. It's really, everyone should be really grateful. Thank you for this. Because people need to know exactly what they're considering. To Anne's point, I have been involved with USGS for a while now because they are involved with New York State DEC on a water sustainability study for Long Island because the water conditions are so much worse in Western Suffolk. They started the work in Western Suffolk and they're working their way east. And here they are now. And they were looking for a site for a well in Orient, and it worked out very well. We contacted people in Orient, and they used the Oyster Pond Schools as a site, which is a great learning experience for the students as well, because they got to see the well drilling and what's going on, what does that mean. They went all the way down to bedrock. It was a great experience for the kids, but it also provided USGS with a place in Orient to actually do some sampling. So Anne referenced that technology. They can put out a wire because what they're measuring is the extent of the aquifer. And a lot of that has to do with the chlorides, so where the salt water actually is. And they don't have to do wells to do that. They can put a wire grid out on a field, and they can measure the chlorides from that. The wells are also very helpful because they know exactly where the different layers, the strata of different clay layers and different soil conditions are. And they need that to know how to kind of predict and model where that fresh water is and how much stress you can put on that aquifer if you pump. If you go back 100 years, every house had a well, very shallow. If you go back 50 years, every house and every farm had wells, very shallow, but they were spread out across the whole aquifer. So when there was higher demand, there was stress on the aquifer evenly spread out. Now, if you put one supply well supplying a huge area in town, there's a lot. We have to go. There's a lot of stress on one part of the aquifer, and of course you're going to have upwelling and upconing of salt water there, as opposed to having it all spread out. And you didn't have that for years. You didn't have that kind of stress on the aquifer, except on some of the barrier areas where you put, a lot of houses right on the beach. Then of course there was a lot of salt water there. So we have reached out to, we as the town, reached out to USGS because they reached out to me last week in an email saying that there is more work that could be done. They haven't finalized their study. Members, Ann, thank you for coming in, member of the Southfield Town's Water Committee, to ask for the enhanced study to be done. Maggie, you're on the Water Committee also, thank you. And there's every reason to believe that they would be willing to do that study for the town. So we just have to figure out, the extent of it and how long, what it will cost and how long it could take. I know Orient's also doing their own, they've hired an engineer to do their own water study. I think it's preliminary for the Water Authority to say, we're going to do the scoping even when USGS has done all that work. And we should get that information first before they have a full analysis of what our aquifer actually looks like. Because they're going to be, through this work USGS is doing and the Orient's doing, they're going to have a much better idea of the state of the aquifer. So this is all very helpful. I think it's all very positive, and without community engagement, we wouldn't be this far along. So, thank you.
Yeah, could I ask you a question? Talk about the well, Orient School, going on for days and days. I drove by it a few times. Who did that well, and what is the water being used for anything now, or if it's part of the future test?
No, it's just a test well that they would normally put in. They have a test well in Southold. They have one in Orient. It's the USGS, and they work with the New York State DEC, who does the well drill, who's funding this currently. And when we had 2 state assemblymen come out on a tour, and we happened to end up in Orient to take a look at this. So, because they should see what New York State DEC is funding. So that well will be used by them it's just a test well. They're not using the water. Well, that's what we're looking at. Right now, we've got a lawn irrigation bill, and that would require people to put rain sensors on their lawn irrigation. And every time it rains and you go up and down the road, you see lawns being watered by automatic sprinklers in the rain. And so it's a basic water saving device. I've been to, it's a long story about LICAP, but there's been a lot of conservation measures that have been attempted, but you really need to put, if 70% of the water is being used, treated, pumped and treated to potable standards, and then used on lawn irrigation, then you have to wonder, is there a limit, or should there be a limit to that? And at the very least, it shouldn't be used when it's raining and not really necessary. So, right. So there's a lot more we can do for conservation measures, and I think the scoping should bear that out, but the water authority themselves, they're in the business of pumping and treating and selling water. They have tried different conservation tools in the past, but they clearly aren't adequate if their message is that they need to bring more water in. Well, certainly when the water pipes originally came into town, they enabled a lot of smaller lots that didn't have proper setbacks to septic systems to be built on right away. So because the lots were small, you need a legal separation between a well and your neighbor's septic system. And so once the public water came in, a lot of lots got built on immediately. That was that spurred that development. So we're well aware if there's water there, and I think Bob said it, that eliminates a threshold for development. Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I think Southold's done a pretty good job of trying to plan for development and regulate development. And so I think this is part of that whole process.
Would it be helpful to comment, what are your plans to liaise with the town, to assist with development, or like what kind of things?
Yeah. Right. So you could, instead of saying, what are your plans, you could say, please describe your plans to liaise with the town of Southold, or please incorporate the zoning update, a review of the zoning update as you consider the effects of this induction of new water to the town. Or you could say, please consider the town's comprehensive plan and how the transmission of additional water to the town may create conditions that would change the outcomes from that plan, that might change the outcomes of the town's planning. Those some things you could say. I mean, you can try to construct them as directives, is my point. I think that, you could potentially say that you understand the USGS may be able to work under a town contract to do additional work in Southold. Please make sure that any conclusions that you come to are based on the USGS's most recent data, something like that. I don't want to put exact words in your mouth, but I'm trying to show you how to take some things and put them into directives for how you want them to proceed with the draft environmental impact statement. Because eventually what happens is, after the review that's going to come later, first of all, they can take as long as they want to produce the draft environmental impact statement. They're under no time frames for that. It's their project. So if it takes them 3 years to do it, yeah, that's a pain in the neck for them, but they can. It's not like there's an applicant who's gonna, harass them. This is their project, so they can take the time, they can do it right. And then later, when there's time for public comment again, they have to listen to all of us again and see if they did it to our satisfaction and they answered the concerns that the public had. And then they have to do something called a final environmental impact statement. And at that point, they have to take all of the material, the draft environmental impact statement, all the comments that have come in about the draft environmental impact statement, and address those comments one more time and produce a document that is going to be the basis of decision making. Under the law, they are supposed to base their decision on on the final environmental impact statement. And so the last step for them is producing something called a findings statement. And it basically says, this is the project. We produced a DEIS. We got the comments. We read the comments. We addressed the comments. We chose a preferred alternative, or we chose the best alternative. We've mitigated to the maximum extent practicable. And here's our decision. And the final decision can be part of that document or it can be separate, but that's where it ends. And that's where the environmental review ends. They may have other concerns later, financial and political and whatever else, but the environmental review ends at that point. So we want the best job done possible. Go ahead, what's the question? No, the proposed mitigation should be in the draft environmental impact statement. But yes, well, the scope now is your outline of what should go into the draft environmental impact statement. When they come back with that DEIS, which could be at any point down the road when they're ready, that's where you should see more elaboration on what the mitigation is. They should make it clear that whatever impacts they have identified have been mitigated to the maximum extent practicable. You can. So after the draft environmental impact statement comes out, we can comment on that. And we can set them straight again. But what we can't do, we can do it, but it won't mean anything. The best time to say what should go into the EIS is now. Later you could say, gee, I wish you would have covered X, Y, and Z, but they have no obligation to do that at that point. So get your X, Y, and Z in now. Yeah, sure. Do you have an answer for that, Bob?
Yes, so they manage a budget like anybody else. They get rates from the ratepayers. The capital budget for the pipeline that they're proposing to build is coming out of their bonding. But I mean, anybody who's a customer, I'm a Suffolk County Water Authority customer. A portion of my rates is going not just to provide water to my house, but to run the operation. So their operation runs like anybody else. They got a capital budget. They have revenue set aside for some portion of that, and revenue set aside for the draft environmental impact statement, probably out of operations. So it's just it's budgetary on there. Yeah, they had the. I know they had the money for this, the $35 million for the pipeline, and then internally they probably also have an operating account for all of it. Yeah, so the service line is totally different. Like once there's this is transmission to an existing distribution system. If you were connecting to a distribution system, then you would pay for a service line. Or in the case of Orient, if Orient wanted to create a service district, it would have to pay for likely the distribution of the service lines if the county did not have the capital to put the transmission line, let's say from East Marion to the village, and then the distribution into the village on the customers.
I just want to clarify. I know there's questions, but I remember on Thursday night a point was made, and I just want to make sure if you weren't there Thursday night that you know this, especially if you're from Orient. that section of the project is not part of the plan, but it's being covered in the draft environmental impact statement that they are now going to be producing. Because under the law, you can't, if you think that something might happen in the future, you need to cover, if there's any anticipated future aspect of this project, it needs to be covered now. You have to look at the potential environmental impacts together. You have to look at the cumulative impacts. If they did not also include Orient now, they could be accused of segmenting the review, which is illegal. So having been aware of that, they're putting that in there, but they made it clear on Thursday night they're not going to bring water to Orient unless Orient wants it, and there may be a cost to the residents to do that. So we've had hands up a lot. Okay, let's go to you first.
I think
Question makes sense.
yeah, I think I understand what you're asking. And I would say that I look at a project like this in there are two distinct ways. One is the very specific on the ground impacts of erosion, sedimentation, wetlands disturbance. What are the details of the directional drilling, right? All of those kinds of construction related aspects of the project. And then there's the more kind of metaphysical, if you will, question of how does one deal with the concept of growth inducement as an issue, and that's more complicated because this is a shared responsibility, largely at the local level, planning and zoning and land use, but they are, you know, let's assume the very best, they're an inadvertent participant in that happening. So they have some obligation to, and I've talked to Jeff Szabo, the CEO there, about this, and they get this, like they need to say something, but the challenge is, you know, they're not looking to say that they're responsible for every bit of growth inducement that ever happened in the county because they brought somebody clean water, and they probably shouldn't. The reality is, you know, and I think I said this at that last meeting, somebody has to you got to sit down and try to figure out how you're going to manage this, because eventually people want and should have clean water, right? But they shouldn't have to have it at the expense of their entire community. That's the rub. And this environmental impact statement can't solve all of that, but it can set parameters around how you would solve that problem. So, for example, a mitigation measure might be, and this discussion took place on Thursday, you know, west of us in the town of Riverhead, there may be more risks to growth inducement than there are here because you've got a bunch of undeveloped land on the other side of the North Road, which has already been the subject of interest and controversy in the town of Riverhead. This is not part of their district, but that's an example where, well, what if the transmission line one day is out there and someone wants to tap in and have a distribution line? So it's important to get it down. It's important to think about it. I'm not sure you can resolve it in the DEIS, but there's an obligation to identify it and where mitigation is possible to try to seek that mitigation. And also, I would say, to set the stage for policy decisions among local electeds to, you know, to do something about this at the local level.
No, I agree with Bob. And there's one more thing to think about, which is you're the experts about living here. And that's why residents really need to be involved. The Water Authority works all over Suffolk. Yes, that's true. But they don't live everywhere. You do. You live here. And you may know something about your particular neighborhood. And you may have some expertise that you want to lend to this situation. I mean, we have a very diverse community in terms of backgrounds and professions and schooling. You may have some expertise that arouses certain questions that you have. And those you can put forward as a directive for them to address. So is there a playbook? Start with where might there be an environmental impact that you can conceive of. And if you have some expertise to lend to that, offer it, and then proceed from there. There are lots of books you can get out of the library or go online and look about what environmental impacts take place. But basically, you want to look at your own neighborhood and think about what additional water to your neighborhood may mean. Maybe it may be something you want.
I'm curious if either of you or both of you can speak. As I understand, Shelter Island shut down. I know this village, we're seeing water coming out of the ground. Accelerated the rate.
I mean, I share that observation in lots of places. This is happening, and it's a combination of factors with rising tides and the pressure of salt water, which pushes in both laterally and then vertically when you draw the fresh water out. So, sometimes these things reach a peak, and suddenly what seemed like it wasn't a big deal 6 months ago, it's like with traffic lights, right? It's not a problem that one traffic light goes in, things are backed up for 10 miles. I kind of feel like this happens with water quality. Like there's always been the issue of saltwater intrusion, typically in the very low-lying, areas that Al described earlier. But now it seems like what's happening is that, this saltwater wedge, which is coming, there's more of it. It's affecting more private wells, and the public wells, because they're more shallow, are also, because of the demand, pulling up salt at the same time. So those two things are happening simultaneously, which leads you to the problem which they accurately describe. But I think it's, we've met the enemy, and it's us. You can't have 70% of your water going up for irrigation and not assume that something will happen. So this is what's happening.
I saw more questions. Yes?
My question is, during the process, having scoping and then addressing the issue, and we are able to look at how they address it. Who decides that a certain issue that was raised about the scope needs to be addressed? Does they have to address every question that?
No, they
anybody has?
don't. No, it's a
And
good question.
Who decides which ones get to part they address?
Very good question. Thank you. So did everybody hear the question? Okay. So in this case, the lead agency is the applicant. So they have a lot of discretion, and
So they decide.
but they will ultimately decide. But again, we have numbers. They may pay their consultant to sort through all of the input, and the consultant has to make note of how many comments came in on various particular topics. And if everybody or lots of people are focusing on the same topic, they darned well better address it. And now will they necessarily believe or state back that this is a serious concern and then address it the way you want to? No, they may not, but they will certainly take note of how many people feel that way. And they have to address it in some way. You can't just ignore it. Now, if a single comment comes in that sounds strong, but they see as irrelevant or not related to their project, they may say outright that this is not related to the project, or they may say something simple like noted. They note your comment. So we don't know exactly how they're going to address it, but we have the advantage of numbers, and the civic associations on the North Fork are phenomenal right now in holding these meetings and getting people educated and involved. And believe me, they don't have that in other parts of Suffolk County. This is going to really make their eyes go wide open.
As a corollary to that, once they've written the DEIS, then who decides if they have adequately addressed an issue?
we
because
do
of-
in our numbers and our
Just us.
comments, and then they have to address those in their final environmental impact statement. You're correct in your assumptions that this may not turn out the way you want it to. That's, okay? But what you will find, I mean, I'm so encouraged by how many people turned out on June 2nd and how many people turned out on June 12th and how many people are here tonight and how the civics are carrying this forward. The North Fork Civics are coordinating all of these meetings and getting lots of people involved. And it's when lots of people are involved that the difference is made. And I have seen that, and Bob has seen that. It's numbers.
I'm happy for your optimism. But I do remember a project that has never happened in East Marion, and that was stalled because the applicant created the DEIS, and the lead agency, which was not the same as the applicant, said, you have not addressed these issues adequately, and you need to go back and address them properly. And they never did. They never came back. Okay. The project died right there. This case, since there is no between the applicant and the lead agency, there is a whole level of oversight which is gone.
You're right.
It's true.
And this upsets me a great deal.
You're right.
I just want to point out two things though, when you move past optimism, which is, the courts play a role in this as well. If they have really not handled this in a way where it's pretty obvious that they've basically just decided that day one what was going to happen, predetermined outcome. You can, I've been involved in these cases for 35 years. You can ask the courts to review the decision. And so there is one more layer of somebody who's not them. The other thing is, you remember the other project in East Marion that didn't go anywhere, which was the pipeline to Orient, because people showed up, the local government showed up, and the Water Authority, while it is a public benefit corporation and somewhat independent, it's not immune from the commentary of elected officials when they're involved. Obviously, we saw that with the pipe. They actually had the money in hand to do that project, and they turned it around. So, the SCWA process in some ways is a vehicle as much as it's an analysis. It's a vehicle to provide input and opportunity and transparency. But if it goes sideways, the courts do have the ability to review this, and you have to find something that's a legitimate breach. But also the ongoing engagement from elected officials who do exert an energy on the outcomes of the Water Authority. That works through the SCWA process because it's a vehicle for them to get into that process and start making noise if noise needs to be made.
I think Bob said it very well, and that's not to say that the SCWA process is political, but the fact that, for instance, we have two elected officials here tonight who are listening. They're hearing you, they're hearing the questions, they're hearing us. They're probably going to submit comments in the SCWA process. They read the papers. We've had the newspapers have been covering these meetings. There will be continued conversations, and the more and more voters are involved in a process, people pay attention. So there's many interplays here, but Bob is right. There is court relief that can come if that is desired or needed later. There were questions? Yes.
I think you can ask them what you think is important, but one of the issues where they do have data is what they're pulling from their existing wells, right? So they know in each well field what they're seeing as a trend, and that those numbers are recorded all the time because they have to meet certain standards before they can send that stuff out to the public. So I think the most current data probably lies within the well fields where these problems exist. Also, County Health Department probably has data with respect to where they're getting, people having problems with individual wells that are left. So I think those two sources are fairly reliable and fairly current. More is always better, and I think what the USGS is doing in Orient is great because you're down 800 feet to bedrock and you're going to get a really interesting profile of what's going on there. So the argument becomes in SCWA, what is the significance and relevance of the question and the response? If they say, look, we have 85 different data points that are telling us this, and we say you should have another 10, maybe, but maybe not. And that's just the way it goes. It's like science anywhere. At some point, they make a decision. I mean, I would just say, and again, I'm not defending the Water Authority, but they're going to spend $35 million to do this. I think they need to do it rather than just throwing pipe in the ground. So they have a reason to believe that their supply system is in trouble. And now how far you go with that, how far you extend it, all of those different questions. But I'd be surprised if they just wanted to burn $35 million if they thought they could manage it the way they've been managing it.
That's an economic factor working on because they have wells here. Were they placed in the right spot? Are they overdrafting in some areas? Are they drawing the chlorides in because they're overdrafting certain areas the way they manage the 60 wells? I mean, so it becomes economic because they've made that investment. It's a huge investment, not only the wells, but the infrastructure to treat the water there and then to pipe it all over the place. So for them to try to develop another well field, and I know they were looking to develop other well fields in town, and I believe they still are, but that's just an economic thing for them. Say what's the easiest, and then they don't have to manage what, or they have to manage what. So it becomes a big management issue as well as an infrastructure issue.
I'm thinking about the 35 million, and I agree that they're not just going to blow the 35 million. I expect that they think they're going to make a return on their investment. And so, and I'm listening to Al talk about, perhaps this has been mismanaged. And I guess I'm wondering, I heard them say different things at the last meeting, that they could retire some wells and maybe give the aquifer a chance to regenerate itself. But then they also said maybe some farms could use more of the aquifer, which I thought those two statements conflicted. So that leads me to wonder if we can ask them to create some kind of holistic monitoring or reporting back to us, because it does seem like, well, okay, if this happens, someone also said, if you're a paperclip maker, you sell paper clips. So, we don't want them to keep saying we need more. Now we need to pipe in more. We need to do more things. So, and conservation, they had some things they talked about, but it seemed like a lot of people hadn't heard about these advertisements, or there was some campaign that had 1,000 people who had received some kind of email and 52 people who had a discussion with them. And it didn't seem like it was rigorous, and it's not in their interest. So is it possible, as part of the directives that we put together, to put some sort of ongoing obligation to do holistic management on them?
I think you can. I mean, one thing I can tell you that does exist, when the pipeline that we litigated years ago went out from kind of mainland East Hampton across the Napanee Strip, they were obligated to track, monitor, and report on how much water was coming and how that changed over time. And that provided data about whether or not, like the argument the other night was, hey, listen, we're only going to use this pipe, 10% of the time, whatever it is. If you track it over time and suddenly now it's max capacity 12 hours a day, that's a different issue. So I think it's responsible to ask for that type of data. I would think they would want it too. So that's a thing.
How would you put that in a directive as a scoping comment?
I think that as a mitigation measure, that the Water Authority should provide a regular monitoring, reporting, and public transparency requirement on the use of this new pipeline. Something like that. But the point being, we should all know what's going through the pipe, and there should be a publicly available way for us to find out so that we can then go ask questions about it later on. Now, the sort of holistic management strategy, and I'm, again, not speaking, I think they would argue that that's what led them to this, because they They can't keep up with the multiple small wells that they have, and they can't find new wells to drill. And so now they're sort of like, okay, if I was going to spend $30 million doing something, they ended up with this thing. Like I know, for example, my community, I have a community well field. It had contamination. The water, basically, I think my community handed it off to the water authority because they didn't want to manage it anymore. Water authority picked it up. Like there's a guy out there every day doing something. They're in and out there. You know, I'm sure if they could get rid of that well field, they would be thrilled. And I'm right across the street from the bigger well field they have at Island's End, which they're very happy with because that's a big, deep well and they get lots of water out of it, and dollar for dollar, it makes more sense. But they're kind of stuck with my thing in my community. But that does produce water that then gets shoved into the line to help them keep the capacity up, right? If you got rid of that one that they don't like mine, then they would have to replace that capacity, which then brings them to, let's bring it from Flanders because it's clean and the well's already there. So those kind of things, again, they should be maybe obligated to explain that. The document should explain the sort of comprehensive water management and development strategy in North Fork as part of this document. And you could review that and see whether or not you think it makes sense. So I think it's again, as Louise points out, it's kind of the way you ask the question.
Not to ask a question.
Right, to sort of direct them to do
Right.
something. And again, they do have this ability to say, well, it's not a relevant comment, and you can fight over it. But yeah, putting it clearly and succinctly like that, I think.
Yes.
Go dry. The one under the pine barrens by pulling water from it.
I mean, that question was raised. Having worked on the Pine Barrens Protection Plan in 1993, there's about 68 trillion gallons of water in the Pine Barrens. Even I, as an environmental guy, probably have a hard time saying that you're going to drain the Pine Barrens. But, you know, you should know where the water's coming from. There should be a sustainable yield. If that well field has a sustainable yield, you should know what it is. And, you know, drip, drip, drip over time, you know, you just need to be, they talk about conservation. They need to be thinking about conservation in their most productive well fields as well as but it's probably not going to drain your deep source. You know, again, you're in the Pine Barrens, you can go down 300, 400 feet into clean water as opposed to 6 or 3 or whatever you have in some places.
Margaret?
So, at that meeting the other day, there were two people from Orient who talked about the PFAS levels in their water. And that sort of just got dropped. But if they have such polluted water, do they need to have the pipeline come to them or not? I don't understand how that's going to be solved. And is that an excuse for them to do this thing?
Well, the thing is that if they bring the water to the village, you know, down the line, I mean, where that gentleman was speaking from, he's practically at the point. That's a very long, expensive run to get out there. Now, just as sort of a parallel, many years ago, the Browns Hills development developed a nitrate problem from agriculture. Water Authority, actually it was the county health department originally. They had put under sink filters, and basically they had sort of operated that way, which was the under sink filters were provided to that community. I want to say it was through the health department, but then the Water Authority eventually put in smaller wells, and that well field currently supplies that subdivision. Eventually, they would probably want to say, okay, if we're at the village, now we can jump the Browns Hills, because we don't have to worry about those shallow wells, but it's still a long run, expensive run to get to Orient Point. So my just only from having heard those two gentlemen speak was that they probably need a local, like, under sink kind of methodology there, something, you know, a carbon filtration system you could put in either, you know, community-wide or in each house, because the likelihood of the Water Authority, you know, and the Water Authority will make no money off of serving one subdivision at the point and running you know, whatever it costs per mile to run, you know, to run a transmission line. I mean, I feel for those guys. They're in a tough spot, but even if they went to the village of Orient, I think it would be unlikely that they're going to jump all the way to the point. Some significant motivation or a lot of money that falls from the sky.
I called water because I was so disturbed by this again. who said they had so many parts per trillion that they didn't want to have their grandchildren over, that they couldn't shower with the water. So unless I got this wrong, and please correct me if I'm memory of the EPA says 4 is fine, but New York State says no, 10 is good. And this man said he had 8.6. So it's not even that high, and there are people on Long Island that have thousands of parts per trillion. So I asked Mermaid, can you handle this with an RO system, reverse osmosis under the sink, or a whole house? Like, is it so expensive for these people to do that? And they said, no, it's about $2,500 for a house. So I'm totally thrown as to that. It seemed like they had no option. But they're not even saying they're going to go over the causeway yet. So
You know, I give room to people, you know, people just know they have a problem and they're coming to an event to say, listen, you guys are talking about water. I got this problem. I mean, I think that's fair. I don't expect people to know the ins and outs of how it gets financed and when it gets built, you know, and I think those gentlemen may not have even known that the Water Authority has not even talked about building a pipe from East Marion to the village, right? So I think an under sink activated carbon system or something like that. Yeah, and maybe they'll end up there. I don't know.
I think there were still some questions in the.
I have a very basic question. I'm very new to this, but it seems to me, just from the little that I read in newspapers, this is the first meeting I've been to on this topic, that on a larger level, it seems like it's a redistribution of water from one place to another. It's like East Marion, say, second phase of the project, to Orient, like taking water from one area and delivering it to another area. And Greenport isn't mentioned as well. There's no pipeline being built through Greenport or Suffolk Village. Is there any way that there's a danger this could involve, like taking water from one area and delivering it to an affluent area? A redistribution of water. Deleterious to an area. The aquifers are deeper, water will be taken from and delivered to a more affluent distance.
Right. This very issue came up when the Napeague pipeline eventually went to Montauk, because Montauk was having problems with salt getting into its wells. And that connection was made in the interest of public health. And it's drawn a lot of water, much more water than they originally thought was going to be drawn when they just did Napeague. It has not, it hasn't resulted in a collapse of the primary water supply, because where they're drawing from, which is like somewhere close to East Hampton Airport. But the way that, I'm not a water expert, but the way water distribution works, as I understand it, moving it from where you have it to where you need it is part of the game plan. And the trick is making sure that you are sure that where you're taking it from, because all of the water that's currently in South Hall Town, coming from all of these various wells, it's all intermingled. It's all working kind of together, and it's all kind of shoved into the pipe.
Might water end up going from Greenport to Orient?
Well,
In other words,
No, there's no
Greenport
pipe
is
there.
very popular. Well,
This is about bringing the pipe from the Pine Barrens
Yeah,
out to the town of South.
yeah. So
now
this,
I'm talking about the second phase
That would connect to
from
the other
East
pipe.
Marion to Orient.
right.
It has to be covered.
Yeah, it would connect into the larger, if it were to be done, it would connect into the larger system, which would at that time be fed both by the well fields that exist and are still operational in South Hall Town, as well as this supplemental source, which is coming into the pipe as well. That's just how they work it. Right. But it is coming from a different place, and you're right. It's coming from one place and going. And it's not recharging back to where it came.
Correct.
I think we'll make this probably our last.
I don't know about last, but what I didn't realize 6 months ago is that I am a customer of Suffolk County Water Authority because I live in the village of Greenport. And long ago, well, the easternmost wells in the well field, the 60 wells in the town of Suffolk, were they, for the most part, or maybe entirely, owned by Greenport, and then part of the transaction where it was sold to the Water Authority, Suffolk County?
I mean, Greenport had its own well system, but there were multiple other well systems. Like the one in my community actually went in at the time that the subdivision was built, and it was a community well field for that subdivision. That was back in the 70s. So there were a bunch of those out there. In fact, if little map I have over here shows you some of the well fields. They're kind of all over the place, and some of them were put in by the Water Authority, like Laurel Lake, places like this. Some of them actually were just rehabilitated community well fields that they then tied into their system over time.
So what I was wondering, and maybe asking the mayor, since that's true, that residents of the village are really customers of Suffolk County Water, will the village make some kind of statements or pose some kind of questions as part of this process?
We're going to be talking about it, and I'd like to.
And will some village residents, particularly some with some extra expertise, which I do not have, participate in that?
The other thing worth noting that I didn't mention earlier, wells were sold off, large water towers, also a village asset. But I was just using Suffolk County Water.
Any other last questions? Okay.
Glad they're not, because if it was just the county, they'd probably only be Western Suffolk. Don't forget, we have 2 county legislators who represent us, and 14 represent the rest. I know how badly I was thought that they sometimes.
Can I just ask one more question? And I ask this because I honestly don't know. Usually I think of pipelines and transmission as being very dangerous in and of themselves, but here we're just transmitting water. Is there anything that we should be thinking about and putting together comments about the transmission process and potential negative environmental impacts? If there were a leak, or I know some part will be underwater, are there any sorts of things that we should be thinking about and potentially commenting on or issuing directives with respect to regarding the actual transmission of the water?
In broad strokes, I think the area of inquiry that I'm most interested in is the directional drilling and basically maintaining a pipe in a very corrosive environment, and how that's. And there are different ways to do it. I just want to know what that plan is, and obviously, if you're inserting and going out in the wetlands area or near a wetlands area, those physical impacts would be.
I would just want to say that you can read more at scwa.com/NFB, stands for North Fork Pipeline. And you will, if you don't pick up paperwork on your way out, you can find some of the same. You find their full environmental impact, full environmental assessment form there, and their draft scope at that website. And you can then decide if you like the scope or not. Thanks to Bob and to Supervisor Krupski and some others, the deadline for comments was extended. So that's, I guess, now July 11th. Do I have that correctly? And also, thanks to comments that came in on last Thursday, you have more words, more space for more words. They had originally had a button that you could push and it said, keep it to 500 words, please. And who can really do that? So now it gives you 999 characters, but it also allows you to attach anything you want. So you can make all your comments in a treatise and just attach it as a file and say as much as you want. And I encourage you to say as much as you want, but try to organize, of course, into sections. So if you have different topic areas, it's always helpful to name your topic before you say what you have to say. Just like writing a report, little headlines. Make it easier for the consultants to see what you have to say, organize it for themselves, and respond. So remember, there's actual human beings at the other end reading your comments, and they have to do a good job in understanding what you want and seeing if it matches what Al wants and seeing if it matches what Margaret wants and putting them into groups. So they have the job of grouping your comments and seeing that there are 11 comments on this one and 562 comments on this one, and only one person is concerned about this. And they have to organize it. So put it into headings, say what you have to say, and go at it. Because this is a really hot topic for the North Fork right now. And people are really busy with other things. I know we have the whole zoning update going on. We've got preservation of Plum Island going on. We have lots of things going on to be aware of. And I'm encouraged. I really am. And I am an optimist, so you can criticize me for that if you want to. But I couldn't be in this as long as I have been if I weren't. Same here, I think, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Bob and Louise. This was fabulous, and stay tuned. I know our Civic and the rest of the Civics are all going to be working together to get some more information out and meet that July 11th deadline. So thanks for coming, guys. Have a great night, and we'll see you soon.